Evening. What is a chaplain? Ooh. In case you don't know, get this right. Thank you. In any parish or church or organization, you would have a leader. Well, the chaplain is the leader for the faith development, spirituality, and religious needs in an institution as well, particularly the Correctional Center. And that's where I worked for quite a number of years. The chaplaincy is another form of the word referring to the building or the activity. The chaplaincy is also called the Pastoral Care Department. And one day I got a letter in the mail addressed to the Partial Care Department. The Ontario Reformatory or Guelph Correctional Center or Yorklands presents with some beautiful and inviting property. I know that you have admired the lush green and the intriguing rock formations, and the artistic work certainly proves that. Did you know that people used to go to the OR, as it was originally named, for picnics, Sunday afternoon family walks, and even to stage wedding photos? The ducks, the geese, the beautiful blue herons, my favorite, were all treasured and enjoyed. Yet, the residents inside the buildings, the inmates, never experienced any of that. I wish to contrast, briefly, tonight, the beauty and the light outside and the darkness inside. Let's take a short look at the land inside the fence. Oh, there it is. Did you do that or did I do that? Thank you. Would you like a cue sheet? Thank you. We're rolling. Yes, the fencing going around immediately in front of the building, all the way back on both sides, the chapel being the little building over here. As you can tell, it's outside the institutional walls, which gave us some freedom, but it's still inside the security fence. So, I'm going to take a moment and describe the lack of beauty or color inside the institution. The men, up to 1,000 in the early years, 600 in the later years, lived in very close quarters. They were in cement boxes, behind bars. Rarely were there windows to look outside, let alone let in any sunshine. They went to work through underground tunnels into closed shops. Their life was routine, predictable, and dark. In contrast, though, there were some work responsibilities that allowed them to work outside. A long time ago, in the early days of the center, they had herds of cows that they milked, and pigs. The men grew crops, and they created the landscape. You, of all people, probably know that the ponds were dug by inmate work groups. It's an underground spring, and the ponds were dug by them, moving rocks and dirt. There was a special space inside the main building and the west fence. There was a separate building called the Chapel of Hope and a good-sized chapel yard where one could see the parking lot and some of the front field. If you look at the far picture, that's the one view of the chapel yard. The men would plant flowers all along the building, which really looked great, made it green, made it colorful. And even one year, we found these beautiful, tall, green plants coming up with very thin leaves. Oh, you're fast. Yeah, I was sure they were fine, but a couple correctional officers was, oh no, you're growing marijuana, you're all using it in the chapel. So we were quarantined until security got over and laughed and says, they're not marijuana plants. Gotta laugh. Let's see, in the chapel and the chapel yard, we had some good and colorful things happening inside the fence on the land. The chapel itself, as you see, was brick and wood inside. Was brick and wood And inside, we covered the walls with inmate art. The place was bright and it was open for free movement. This is the inside of the chapel, and some activities and volunteers and chaplains going on. With that freedom in our worship service, we would often sit in circles. And for quite a while, when we had the inmates who were in the treatment side come over, and these are fellows who were very broken mentally and some physically and a lot of needs. So we'd sit in a circle, and I would sit in the circle, and then I'd stand up and I'd give my message for the day. And for a long time, we had an inmate, let's call him BJ, who would have to sit right beside me. And I would be preaching my sermon, and if I stopped for a breath, he'd go, "Right on." My very own amen quarter. Christmas time, the men decorated the chapel. We had 2 levels, up and down. The one year, I just pulled out the box of decorations. 5 of the fellows said, "Oh, we'll decorate up here." And 5 of the fellows said, "We'll decorate downstairs." I had already, thanks to a couple of the correctional staff, obtained 2 Christmas trees from the tree farm across the road and up the hill. So we had live trees, we had them up, the fellows decorated them. The crew that went downstairs were on their own with their box of decorations. The crew that went downstairs were some lifers. These guys had done a lot of time. The kind of fellows that you don't want to meet in a dark alley. You know, the big biker types. They did the basement. I entrusted them. At one point, one of the fellows came up and said, "Connie, there's no silver paper. Gotta have some." Called the kitchen, got some aluminum foil. Later on, I went down and saw what they did. The basement was amazing. The tree was perfect, and on top was this beautiful aluminum foil star. Give them the opportunity. There were 2 levels to the chapel. In the basement, we had programs where we could talk about the struggles, and the men could learn how to make changes in their lives. We had family days when the girlfriends or wives could come to visit. They had more freedom, where they could hold hands with no barriers and have a visit with their loved ones. Whoops, I'll go back one. Yeah, that's an inside chapel. Funny person there. One of Bocini's works at the top and at the back of the chapel as well. That was our early structuring. In later days, we managed to get the benches cut in half and have a more circular space for worship. Since 1976, Guelph Correctional Center established a Native Sons program. Native Sons was like a self-help group with an executive and guidelines and special activities. Brian highlighted the room for us as it is now. As it was then, was bright, colorful, always very busy, always full of the Native Brotherhood who came for the programs and the volunteers who came from the community. In our prisons then and even now, the Indigenous population is very overrepresented. These men needed to be able to learn about their culture, their spirituality. The chaplains were given responsibility for this group. And across the years, we found volunteers, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. One thing I want to stress is that the Indigenous practices are very earth-centered. It is important to be on the land, Mother Earth, and see nature and even feel the wind. There's a deep contrast here to the concrete and dark environment these men lived in. The chaplains located a room for the Indigenous men that they could decorate with their own symbols and artwork. And if I'm lucky, the next slide is the sweat lodge. Yes. The wooden frame, the volunteers obtained wood themselves. They would bring in wood for the fire pit that was here and the large rocks. And over the top of the frame would go tarp. The sweat lodge was designated, which was really unusual, as a permanent structure. That one would be on the inventory. It was a regular structure. It was beside the southwest corner of the chapel. It is a small dome tent where the elder or leader went in with 12 men. They brought in heated rocks that they called the grandfathers. Water was poured on the rocks with the effect like a sauna. For the men, again, it was getting close to Mother Earth. They were on the ground, they had only their towel. It's getting close to Mother Earth. They prayed, they had visions, they talked about the cleansing and the healing in their lives in that activity. The power or social was a gathering of Indigenous people, families, friends, and guests from the native centers. There would be traditional drumming and dancing. Some of the people came in their traditional dress. Traditional foods arrived. All the things the men missed and that they couldn't get in the prison. Again, this was a celebration, steeped in tradition, practice, culture, and spirituality. There was one springtime when I would cross from the main building over to the chapel. I noticed a couple of geese hanging out in our chapel yard. Well, there's geese always around, but these two geese seemed to be staying there across a few days. And then I noticed Mrs. Goose was sitting under the tree a lot. So I got a little bolder and I checked it out, and sure enough, she was sitting on eggs. Mr. disappeared for the time being. I was excited. I didn't know what to do. So I phoned the Arboretum. What do I do? What about food? She's inside our security fence. Flew over the fence, I would imagine, but what was she going to do? So they told me she'll feed on the grass. If you have a low pan of water, set it out. She'll have something to drink. But okay, did that. Well, I waited and I watched. And these eggs, these little fuzz balls as they came out, I figured I would name Al Capone, maybe Bonnie and Clyde. I don't know about Derringer, or maybe just plain Fred. But I had the names. And I thought, how are they going to get out? I mean, Mama can fly over that 12-foot whatever fence, the little ones. So, got my camera, went and got the security person and a key, got the fence gate unlocked. And out went Mrs. Goose and her little ones, across the yard, down the hill to the pond. And of course, I had a title for that excitement. Chaplain helps jailbirds escape.